This is Thriving in Business and Life. I'm Christopher Harding.
And I am Will Wilkinson. Welcome to the show. We've got an exciting one this week. We're continuing along on our theme of visioning and offering some practical tips for creating success, happiness, and health from the inside out.
Oh, that sounds like a slogan of some sort.
It sounds like something you might be interested in, right?
It does.
Well, listen carefully.
I want to also mention we had just a wonderful response to our show with Natalie Anastasio Pachetti.
Love that name. For a lovely person. That was a great show.
Yeah, and so we want to thank everybody who tuned in for that. Hopefully we've picked some of you up as followers as well. But we'll have her back soon. So
Absolutely. I think we should have her back and get her to interview us.
Yeah, she's great at that, by the way.
That would be fun.
All right. Well, we talked about vision. We've talked about vision first and results now. And one of the things we alluded to last week was that we wanted to also really dive into that notion of, as we're casting the vision, we get that feeling, and we've seen it, we've felt it, we've said it. That an important part of it next is to really get clear on the way things are now.
Right, and I'm sure there are even some of our listeners who may bristle a little bit at the term visioning because it's gotten a bit of a bad rap for being impractical.
Yeah,
and it kind
wishful
of seems
thinking.
Wishful thinking up in the clouds. Someone might say, well, we got to get down to earth. We got to make some money. We got to deal with the reality.
Right.
Well, this is the paradigm we want to address during the show, the either-or mentality about that.
Yeah.
Either you're just nose to the grindstone, working away, no particular vision, other than a vague dream of what you want, more money, more success, etc. Or, an either-or, you're off in the clouds somewhere with this great vision and you're not doing any work.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I think the difference between maybe personal visions that people create for themselves, which I guess I'm going to show a bias here. My sense is
a bias? I'm shocked. That's it. I don't want to work with you anymore.
Yeah, we're all human, aren't we? The personal vision that I think sometimes has the reputation of being less disciplined and more wishful thinking. Corporate visions are like crafted for months sometimes with committees and to get the wording just right. But
but even there, I think
that's
people
my
who've
point.
done it would admit that they maybe didn't work so well.
Well, the challenge is that it might be really precise, but does anybody really feel anything when they read it? Does anybody really start to measure the way they're doing things going forward against that vision? And some do, absolutely. I've worked with organizations that are very vision focused and they use it as a driver and as a gauge, but too often it becomes a platitude versus something practical. And so as we dive into this next section, there's a piece in the book where you talk about this important, you call it a primary thriving relationship between the way things are and the way we want them to be.
Well, exactly. And this is I think of it as an art form, actually. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote that a sign of true intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing thoughts at the same time and remain functional.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
So that's what we're going to talk about during this program. And it's a technique, it's a mindset, it's a way of being in the world, in your life, and in your work that almost nobody has perfected.
Well, it's interesting, too, because he didn't say two ideas at the same time. He said two opposing ideas at the same time.
Exactly. And in this case, the opposition is between the vision of what we'd like to have and the way things are right now. And often there's denial about the way things are. We're not really acknowledging that, we're going broke quickly, health is terrible, or our wife wants to leave us, etc., etc.
Well, so I want to address what might seem like a possible contradiction. In a past program a few weeks ago, we talked about the analogy of the rubber band.
Right, you saw me. I just pulled it out of my desk here. This is my high-tech tool for my coaching clients.
So you've got one on the index finger and one on the thumb, and as you stretch it apart, it's only going to stay that way so long before either the index finger representing vision moves towards the thumb, or the thumb representing the way things are now.
Exactly. The way I like to put it is you entertain both the vision and the way things are, but you live in the vision and you visit the way things are.
Okay, so that actually answers the question, because I was going to say it's how do I move the way things are towards the vision?
Right.
And you're saying it's by not denying either one.
You have a relationship between the two, and I want to credit Robert Fritz, who writes about this in his book, The Path of Least Resistance. He calls this structural tension. And he makes it very clear, and I believe he was an engineer, that it is an actual dynamic relationship that creates power. And it's the oscillation between these two poles that does it. Now, when I work with clients, often as I introduce this principle, they're not able to create much of an arc. Like I'll say, okay, what's your vision? They'll say, well, I'd like to make more money.
Right.
And then I say,
right.
okay, what's your current reality? And they say, well, I'm not making enough money. Well, those two are both fairly modest pedestrian. I want them to say, my vision is to be fabulously wealthy in ways that benefit the planet.
If that's what they want.
If that's what they want.
Yeah.
And then how are things right now? I'm broke, depressed, and I think my life may be ending. Now, I'm being a little bit facetious, but the point is that's a much bigger arc.
Right.
We've got much more distance between the high side and the low side.
So I'm going to venture a guess here, just based on my own personality probably and experience, is that when there's very little gap, I don't experience much charge or motivation.
Yeah, exactly.
But when there's a bigger gap, when there's something to really reach for, then I can get like, ooh, this is going to be a challenge or exciting, you know?
You are nailing the most important thing here, because people mistakenly believe that passion must always be connected to your bright vision. Well, it is. It can be, but it can fail. On dark days, where does your passion go? And then people use various techniques like affirmations or various substances like coffee to get it back in focus and get motivated again. The real secret here is the oscillation between the two. And you just nailed it in the way you said it. That is what actually empowers you, is that dynamic relationship.
Yeah, I've mentioned this, I can't remember whether it's on the program, but definitely in the book, about a friend of mine, Rick Jones, who's a phenomenal dispatcher of large trucking operation. And he and I started a company way back when. And when things just would start to go crazy, I mean, we had a very, exciting vision of what we wanted to create, and sometimes things just started to go sideways. And I'd look at Rick and his eyes would kind of light up, and he'd be like, "Ooh, now it's getting good."
Exactly.
So he really had learned the art of letting his passion get fired up when things started to go kind of off the rails, because he was excited for the challenge of getting it back on course and using it to maybe even launch us further ahead.
Well, this is just brilliant stuff, because it's the difference between good and great. Jim Collins wrote a book by that name, Good to Great, and he said, you've got to give up what made you good to become great.
There's a...
And just to finish that, what makes us good is keeping things manageable.
Right.
It's tame. It's not too wild.
A survival strategy.
Survival strategies, exactly, like we write about in the book. Thriving is kind of living out on the hairy edge. It's, I remember listening to an NBA player talking about Game 7 going into overtime. And for me, I'd be like totally stressed out. He said, this is what we play for. He was like eating it up. The pressure, the tension, the thrill. He said, this is what we play for. And I got it, that, they're playing a game, but life is meant to be a game. And those risks are manageable when we have this relationship going.
Well, a lot of times you hear people say, and I understand the actual sentiment behind this, but you hear people say, yeah, it's all good. And kind of what that represents to me when I hear that is that it's almost a form of denial. It's almost a form of just saying, yeah, the status quo of surviving is okay, rather than, it's good right now, but damn it, I want it to be great.
Exactly. I have a brother up in Vancouver who's a very accomplished documentary filmmaker. One day he asked me, because he knows I dip into the philosophical stuff a little more than him, he said, what's with this thing, it's all good? He said, that's not my experience. And he does films on like the homelessness problem and drug addiction. He says, it's not all good there.
Right.
And
right.
he was busting what I think is just spiritual pablum.
Well,
Some kind
yeah.
of Hallmark greeting card sentiment. It's not all good. I mean, we can have an optimistic attitude, but we really need to face the harsh realities of what's going on.
We mentioned this in our book about how companies sometimes get kind of mired in the status quo and a sense of self-satisfaction. And we talk about one very well-known photographic film manufacturer that
Who shall remain nameless.
yeah. And I think last time we talked about this, and you said, and their name begins with.
Yeah, right. Not to give too many clues or anything.
But they were so self-satisfied with their past technology.
Right, it was all good.
Yeah, that even with the really gigantic wave heading towards them of digital photography, they remained in denial as opposed to looking at the way things are, regardless of how good they've been in the past, and saying this is no longer suitable for the future.
Well, Socrates said the unexamined life isn't worth living. And a lot of people have made it a lifestyle to never examine what's going on. They just cruise along, it's all good, it'll work out, and then their life's over. I mean, we're advocating being extremely inquiring about what's going on, being unafraid to look at it and be honest about it. And the way we can do that, the way we can endure doing that, is when we have a powerful vision. Otherwise, it's just too depressing.
Yeah. Well, I just think about that because, as you know, with our house has been torn up and so on. And if I didn't have a vision of what that's going to be like when it's done, in the midst of it right now, where nothing's being done, it's just been torn out. It could weigh me down. It's still stressful. Yeah. But having the vision of what it's going to be like to have you and Tashina over when the new kitchen is done, and feeling the celebration of looking at the materials and just feeling how great it feels to be there. I can live in that moment now and give myself some inspiration, some motivation, and then when I go back and look at the blank canvas that it is right now, I can go, this is going to be cool. Yeah. As opposed to, oh no.
Well, the secret to this, which is beyond optimism, is what Jim Collins also mentioned in his book when he interviewed John Stockdale and talked about the Stockdale paradox. Now, Stockdale was a prisoner of war, and Jim interviewed him and said, well, why did you survive when some of your men died in the camp?
Right.
And Jim said, well, the ones who died were the optimists. And Jim said, what? He said, well, those were the guys who kept saying, I'll be out by Christmas. I know it.
Oh,
Christmas would come and go and they were still in the prison. And they'd say, I'll be out by Easter. Easter would come and go and they were still there. Jim said they died of broken hearts. He said, well, I may die in prison. I may never get out. I may never see my wife and children again. But my dream, my vision is that I will get out of here. I'll be reunited with my family. So the Stockdale paradox, the official wording is, face the brutal facts of the situation, but never lose faith in the end of the story.
I like that. Yeah, so rather than trying to put false deadlines on things, there's something else in that story, as I recall, that really struck me as well. We talked about a few weeks back about infusing your values into the present moment, not allowing circumstances to define your values. And part of what we're looking at here is that if I've got a vision, sometimes the circumstances start to really become challenging.
Right.
And if my vision is based on each circumstance happening the way I imagined it, rather than holding the feeling, I think that's why that feeling is still so present. And in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he was in a concentration camp, and he realized the one power he had was to be able to live out the beauty and truth of who he was in the midst of those circumstances, not knowing whether he was ever going to get out.
This is the crucial ingredient here, because unfortunately visioning, the whole idea of doing visions and setting intentions, has gotten married to physical outcomes. And in a lot of cases, we can't really know what the physical outcome is going to be. I like to create targets, have an idea, but that really, we can't guarantee that happening. My wife and I just saw Shakespeare in Love at the theater here.
Yeah.
I love the film with Geoffrey Rush and Gwyneth Paltrow. and the play was astounding. But I'm bringing it up because Geoffrey Rush's character is a producer. He's producing Shakespeare's plays, and he's totally harried and panicking. There's the current day mob who are after him and want to kill him because he's in debt. And 4 or 5 times during the movie and the play, he hits a point of total chaos and things are just completely out of control. And someone says, well what's going to happen? He shrugs his shoulders and he says, it's a mystery.
Right.
And then it all works out. I think embracing the mystery that life is an essential component in this. We engage the left brain, we get very articulate about the way things are, we create a detailed vision, and I think then we surrender to the mystery.
Well, and that's tough. It sounds like woo-woo, maybe.
Yeah.
But
except once we've done it and experienced some success, and I've got so many stories personally and with clients, and so do you, where this balance between the practical and the visionary gets results.
It does, and like you said, it's holding both at the same time. You have broken down, in our book, 8 steps that are really helpful in the assessment process. And so we might not get through all of these, but I wanted to, take the old college try, as the saying goes, to address some of these. The first one is, we've kind of talked about it, making a current assessment, but what else would you say about that step?
Well, I can just read a little bit here and then add on my point. It's one thing to pay more attention to what's going on in a general way. It's another thing to regularly survey the situation in detail to track how you are moving towards the fulfillment of your vision or not. Now, the key element here is we need to know where we're going.
Right.
What is the destination? You're flying to Miami in a few days, I gather.
Yeah.
Well, it helps that you know it's Miami when you book your ticket. It helps that you know what hotel you're going to. If you're renting a car, you've got that organized. So we need to know what the outcome is. Where are we heading? That's how we know which way to navigate. And when people do their current assessment, often what's lacking is a clear vision about where their destination is.
Yeah, exactly. So that I actually know whether I'm on track or not.
How do we know otherwise? Just on the basis of feeling, well, I'm feeling good today and tomorrow not feeling so good. No, am I closer to Miami or farther away?
Right.
Am I closer to my vision or farther away? If I'm farther away, then I can examine why is that? Is this some kind of failure I need to course correct? Or is this actually a valid journey that I'm going on here? We have a way of determining.
Or is it possible that I, realize that the destination I had in mind no longer makes sense once I get out far enough to really have a better perspective?
Well, that and the market may be saying something. In business, following the lean model, for those listeners who've read Lean Startup, this is called a pivot.
Right.
When you develop something, a product or service to a certain point, you get feedback from the marketplace, and you decide we need to make a change.
Yeah.
So you pivot and you actually head in a different direction, which is perfectly okay.
Well, 2 of the biggest social media sites, Facebook and YouTube, both are around today because early on in their evolution, they responded to the way users were using a software application that they didn't really envision that way.
Right.
But they went with what the market was using and allowed the market to define their product.
Well, and unfortunately, we've got a lot of baggage from the past in business, like phrases like winners never quit, which really does a disservice to entrepreneurs. Seth Godin, very popular business writer, he talks about quitting early. He says entrepreneurs assess a situation, we're talking about assessment. They determine with market surveys, etc., whether this looks like a good idea. If they commit to it fully, then they're not going to quit. But they might quit at that point, standing on what he calls the edge of the dip, before they go into production and so forth.
Absolutely. I've got a good friend who's been extremely successful in business, has, made millions and tens of millions of dollars. And one of the things that he said was a key to his success is knowing when to quit.
Yeah.
And that for him, making that judgment early,
right,
was important to him, rather than spending a lot of additional time and money on something that didn't work. And too often we become emotionally invested in our goal or our vision, rather than allowing that vision to be based on a feeling of what we're after, instead of an actual tangible result. Why was I going after that goal? What was the feeling I was seeking? There's another way to arrive at that feeling that isn't tied to that specific goal.
Exactly. A person may say, well, I want $1 million. Well, why do they want it? It's because of how it's going to make them feel. They may be able to feel that way without having $1 million.
Right. Well, or I want to create a company that does this or that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the best idea in the world. And one of the challenges is, from a real practical standpoint, and we run into this all the time coaching entrepreneurs, they come up with an idea, and one of the questions that I ask fairly early on, have you done your competitive analysis? Have you seen who else is out there doing this? Well, I don't think anybody else is out there doing it. Are you sure? How well have you looked? Well, I'm pretty sure they haven't, and I've trademarked or applied for a trademark for my idea. Well, just take a look, see what else is out there. They do research and find out there's 5 other things, not only like what they're doing, but sometimes even better. Well, they're
this
crestfallen.
It's just like raining on their parade. Well, this leads right into number 2 on our list here, which is to make a needs assessment. What does the situation call for? Knowing as much as you can about the current situation, you can then begin to assemble your resources. This is just what you've been talking about.
Right.
The situation is competitors, marketplace, costs, availability of parts, etc., all that.
Yeah, does the market really want it? I have a friend that we've developed some products over the years, and we have a fault in that we're often 4 to 5 years ahead of the market. And fortunately, we've learned after the first time or two of doing that to maybe make a beta model, but not get too far out there in our development until we do our market research. We do the needs assessment better to understand what does the market really need, and therefore what do we need to do, and maybe it's put this on the shelf for a while.
Well, exactly. And number 3 is to make an asset assessment, which is, asking what's readily available to address the problems. When we study what's immediately visible, we often discover surprises, such as a colleague's skills we weren't previously aware of. The challenge literally calls those skills into visibility if someone like us cares to notice.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the first things I learned. I studied with a guy who was very into visioning, and, it was a huge factor in his own success, and he mentored people in this. And one of the things he said was, when we're making a needs assessment and an asset assessment, to realize that there are both needs and assets that are currently off our radar. Mm-hmm. And just to be aware of that things will show up. Maybe it's a need or maybe it's an asset will show up that we didn't even know was even there.
Well, and that leads right into number 4, map the field. Remember to telescope back for a perspective view so that whatever strategy you develop takes the big picture into account. And this is the forest and the trees kind of thing.
Right.
We can be so close to a situation. I mean, I do this as a discipline when I'm, nose into my computer, writing away. I have my alarm set on my phone. I'll get up to stretch, which is physically healthy, but also to get perspective. I'll just step back, and sometimes I'll even look at my screen from farther away. Even that simple technique makes a difference. Or go out for a coffee, mingle in a coffee shop. Ask a stranger about something I'm working on. Anything to get a perspective view that isn't just my own tunnel vision.
Well, and that leads to number 5, interestingly enough.
This is like there's a sequence to this.
You mean it doesn't make this up on the spot?
Quiet. Don't blow my cover.
Yeah, so number 5 is create and manage informal focus groups. And before you dive into that, I mean, this has become probably maybe the most valuable tool I've found in working with organizations and helping them assess what's going on. We'll do things like engagement surveys and 360 feedback surveys, but having the focus group, an informal focus group, and just talking to people about what's going on, you learn so much about the real potentiality, but also what's in the way. What is it? What are the blind spots that maybe the leadership or manager, or if it's me, that I can't see, that somebody else can plainly see?
Well, and as we say in this point, it encourages everyone involved to anticipate problems and begin co-creating solutions, not waiting for the boss to issue instructions. And this applies in family life as well as in organizations. When we engage our wife, our children, our husband, and we work on things together, it's a whole different situation.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned something here that I know is a real important topic for us. It's an important topic of one of our friends, Ben Hummel, who's written the book Summoning Genius, is that part of our job as a leader is to facilitate a culture of genius, to really facilitate the intelligence and genius of our people by going to them and posing questions to them and involving them in the process of assessment.
Well, and that's number 6, learn the art of the question. Questions are a powerful method for surfacing issues and problem solving. Adopting the attitude that you would prefer to hear an answer from someone else rather than to voice one yourself is a leadership style that grows leaders.
You know, it's interesting because I think one of the first things that sometimes people think of when they think of a coach is they think of, somebody who's going to dispense advice.
Yeah, right.
And any of us who've been through coaching, curriculum and coaching certifications and so on know that the art of coaching is the art of the question.
Exactly. Yeah, the cryptic 3 words about giving advice are, don't do that.
Well, and then there's another one. I know you and I have both had personal experience in recent times helping clients with this one, to learn the distinction between a position and needs and interests. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, the way we wrote it in the book here is this is a key to creative solution engineering, where you invite others to abandon individual positions in favor of shared interests that lead the way. So instead of having our positions and jostling around, trying to compromise, find common ground, we really let go of our positions to share a common interest. Once we've established that, there's that well-known book, Getting to Yes, by Bill Urey, Robert Fisher, where they start with the vision that people agree on, they abandon their positions in favor of a shared interest, and then they can move towards it.
Yeah, and we've got some really interesting things going on the floor above us. I'm not sure what's happening, but
it sounds like a hoedown.
But that needs assessment, in the order that we have it, if that's been done properly, the distinction, between needs, interests, and positions become more clear. And last of all, one that sometimes is tough, and I just dealt with this last weekend in trying to help somebody, was their unwillingness to give up their need to be right, even in the face of evidence. So your statement there is, have the courage to call it when we're wrong.
This is so healing, really, because we can live in pretense. We can live in insulation against being shown to be wrong. Whereas if we just say, hey, I'm willing to acknowledge that I'm wrong. Maybe we're wrong here. Let's look at our vision, the results we're getting. Let's look at the climate in the office. Let's look at what's going on with the family. Daring to see, what's actually happening and admit that something may be wrong. I may be wrong opens the door.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got a lot more to cover on this topic, and we'll dive into it more next week. But I want to leave us with a thriving tip of the week. Start out with a surviving tip. If you'd like to continue surviving, then please be blind to what's actually going on. However, if you would like to thrive, develop and maintain high situational awareness. Mm-hmm. So, that's going to give me food for thought. I love to go back to these things and look at them and use them in our current situations, because if not, then they are just platitudes.
Well, right, and it's interesting reading them, talking about them. They're so obvious. So why do we miss them? It really helps to have the reminder. Well, I see our time is just about up here, so we should say sayonara.
Yeah, and if you have questions, stories, etc., send it to thrivinginbusinessandlife@gmail.com. And I'm Christopher Harding.
I'm Will Wilkinson. We love to know that you're listening out there. So I heard a jockey the other day, a disc jockey, saying, "You are the ones who help me do this. I need you." He was a little bombastic, but in our humble way, we need you too.
Yeah,
so let us
absolutely.
know.
And
let us know you're listening.
Thanks to those of you who sent comments in last week. Greatly appreciated.
See you next week.